When Pretty Woman hit theaters in 1990, no one could have predicted how deeply it would touch millions of hearts around the world. What was meant to be a small romantic comedy suddenly became a cultural sensation, changing the careers of its stars forever and redefining what love stories looked like on screen. It wasn't just about a girl from the streets falling for a rich businessman. It was about two broken people finding something real in a world built on fake appearances. Before Pretty Woman, Julia Roberts was barely known. She had done a few films, but nothing that put her on the map. That all changed with the role of Vivian Ward, the sharp, bold, yet vulnerable woman who wins over not just Edward Lewis, but the entire audience. Her laugh, her smile, that unforgettable red dress. Vivian was unlike any romantic lead seen before. She wasn't polished or perfect. She was raw, honest, and full of life. That made people fall in love with her even more. For Julia, it wasn't just another job. It was the movie that launched her into superstardom and eventually earned her the nickname America's Sweetheart. And then there's Richard Gere as Edward Lewis, calm, mysterious, and controlled. He was the total opposite of Vivian. A cold businessman who didn't believe in love until she walked into his life. What made Edward special wasn't just his charm or power. It was how he slowly let down his walls, how he saw Vivian not as someone beneath him, but as someone who challenged him, healed him. Their chemistry on screen was electric, natural, unforced, and deeply emotional. Even now, 35 years later, fans still talk about how these two actors made their characters feel so real, but what many people don't know is that Pretty Woman didn't start out as a feel-good love story. The original script, titled 3000, was a dark, gritty drama about a man hiring a sex worker for a week and then leaving her back on the streets. There was no fairy tale ending, no red dress, and definitely no opera scene. But once director Garry Marshall came on board, everything changed. He had a vision to make the film hopeful, to give both characters a second chance at life. That decision transformed Pretty Woman from a forgotten indie script into one of the most beloved romantic comedies of all time, and the gamble paid off. The film earned over $450 million at the box office and became one of the highest-grossing romantic comedies ever. But more than the money, it became a part of culture. Lines like "big mistake," "big," "huge" entered everyday language. The shopping scene, the bathtub moment, the piano duet, the limo with the rose, each one became iconic in its own right. Fashion brands saw spikes in sales. Beverly Hills tourism boomed. Even the necklace scene, where Richard snaps the box on Julia's fingers and makes her laugh, became one of the most replayed movie clips in history, and that moment wasn't even scripted. Beyond the screen, the film touched hearts because it flipped expectations. Vivian wasn't just a pretty face. She was smart, funny, and full of dreams. Edward wasn't just a rich man. He was lonely, searching for something more. It reminded people that love doesn't always show up the way we expect it, and that sometimes the most unlikely people are the ones who heal us. It was a message of hope, and that's why it stayed with so many for so long. By the end of 1990, Julia Roberts was nominated for an Oscar. The movie was everywhere, on posters and magazines, even on late-night talk shows. People started dressing like Vivian, quoting her lines and dreaming about their own fairy tales. But it wasn't just women who connected with the story. Men, too, saw themselves in Edward, closed off by past pain, learning how to feel again. That emotional balance made Pretty Woman more than a love story. It became a mirror for millions of people, showing them that no matter where you come from, you deserve love that sees your worth. Now, in 2025, as the cast reunites 35 years later, fans are remembering all those moments. The laughter, the tears, the unforgettable music, especially Roy Orbison's "Oh, Pretty Woman," all of it comes flooding back. This wasn't just a movie, it was a movement. And as we look back, it's clear why Pretty Woman still lives in our hearts today. Asterisk, it felt like time had frozen. As the lights dimmed and the screen behind the stage played a clip of Julia Roberts stepping out in that unforgettable red gown, the crowd fell completely silent. And then the curtain lifted, and there they were, Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, standing side by side once again, 35 years after Pretty Woman first captured hearts around the globe. The 2025 reunion wasn't just a Hollywood event. It was a moment that felt like opening a time capsule, rich with memories, emotions, and the kind of magic that never really fades. Held in Los Angeles at the historic El Capitan Theater, the reunion was designed not just as a celebration but as a tribute. The event brought together cast, crew, friends, and fans from all generations. From the moment Julia walked onto the stage, the energy shifted. Dressed in a sleek, modern version of Vivian's red gown, she smiled through tears as the crowd gave her a standing ovation. When Richard Gere followed, in a timeless black suit, the two embraced, and the entire room lit up with applause, emotion, and decades of love pouring in from every corner of the audience. But the reunion wasn't just about posing for cameras or giving rehearsed speeches. It was deeply personal. The cast shared never-before-heard stories from behind the scenes. Julia recalled the first time she met Richard during the audition process and how nervous she was. "He looked at me with those kind eyes," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "and I knew right then that we could create something beautiful together." Richard added that the moment he read the new ending rewritten by Garry Marshall, he called Julia and said, "This is more than a movie. This is a story about healing." That truth echoed in every moment of their reunion. Also in attendance were beloved cast members like Hector Elizondo, who played the kind hotel manager, and Barney Thompson. Now, in his 80s, Hector received one of the warmest receptions of the night. He shared how Garry Marshall encouraged him to bring warmth and dignity to a role that was originally meant to be cold and stern. Garry didn't want the world to see a movie about class divide. He wanted people to see kindness in unexpected places, Hector said. His character's soft guidance of Vivian in the film became a defining moment, one that still brings tears to fans even decades later. Lavra Sangiacomo, who played Vivian's best friend Kit, brought the room to laughter with her cheeky stories about rehearsals and wardrobe malfunctions. But she turned emotional when she spoke about the film's deeper impact. "I didn't realize at the time that we were making something that would help women feel seen, not judged. That's the real legacy of Pretty Woman," she said, holding back tears. Fans cheered, many of them sharing their own stories on social media of how the movie changed the way they saw themselves or their relationships. One of the most emotional moments of the night came when the cast paused to honor those who were no longer with them, especially director Garry Marshall. A large screen played a short video tribute filled with rare behind-the-scenes footage of Garry directing the cast, laughing, making jokes, and encouraging Julia in her most vulnerable scenes. The camera then cut to Julia, who could barely hold it together. "Garry believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," she said. "He gave me this life, this moment, and I miss him every single day." The event also featured a recreated set of the hotel lobby where fans and cast members took photos. Richard even reenacted the famous scene of Edward walking through the lobby with the red rose, this time placing it gently on the podium in honor of Garry. It was quiet, touching, and full of meaning, a nod to the man who brought it all together. One surprise that no one saw coming was the live performance of "Oh, Pretty Woman" by a special guest, Roy Orbison's own son, Alex Orbison. His performance was both haunting and beautiful, reminding everyone of the soundtrack that became just as iconic as the film itself. People in the audience swayed, sang, and cried, their memories flooding back with each word of the song. For younger fans who had only seen Pretty Woman on streaming services, the event was a chance to witness real Hollywood history. For the older generation, it was a reunion with a piece of their youth. The 2025 reunion wasn't just a PR event, it was an emotional celebration of a movie that changed lives. And in that room filled with lights, laughter, and legacy, it was clear that the story of Edward and Vivian still has the power to bring people together. Even 3.5 decades later, the moment Julia Roberts and Richard Gere sat side by side on the reunion stage, something instantly shifted in the room. It wasn't scripted, it wasn't performed. It was real. A quiet, powerful connection that hadn't faded, even after 35 years. They didn't have to say much. The look they gave each other, the way their hands brushed as they laughed, the pauses filled with shared memories. It was enough to remind everyone. Watching why their chemistry as Vivian and Edward was lightning. In a bottle, Julia was the first to speak, and her words held the kind of wisdom only time can bring. When I first played Vivian, I was 22 and scared, she said softly, glancing at Richard. I didn't know how to carry a film. I didn't even know who I was yet. But somehow I stepped into those heels and found pieces of myself in her. Her voice cracked slightly as she recalled the long nights on set, how she'd worry that she wasn't doing enough, wasn't right for the part. Then Richard would lean in during a break and just say, "You're magic," and that was all I needed to keep going? Richard smiled as she spoke, then shared his side. We were opposites in so many ways. She was full of energy, always. Bouncing, laughing, I was more serious, closed off. But somehow that worked. Vivian opened Edward up in the movie, and Julia did the same for me in real life. He admitted that at the time, he'd almost passed on the role. But a screen test with Julia changed everything. She looked at me and smiled, and I forgot. Every line I had rehearsed. I just listened to her because that's what you do when someone's that alive. The audience hung on every word as they dug deeper, revealing how their on-screen love story was grounded in mutual respect. Julia confessed that the bathtub scene, one of the most iconic in the film, wasn't just powerful because of the script, but because she was genuinely overwhelmed and Richard comforted her off camera. That wasn't acting, she said, her voice tender. That was two people learning to trust each other, and you feel that when you watch it. When asked why they never made a sequel, both paused for a long moment. Then Julia answered, because we ended it right. Vivian found? Herself, Edward found his heart. They didn't need more. Richard nodded in agreement. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that leave you wanting just a little more. That's what makes them last, but they also shared how close a sequel actually came. There had been multiple scripts, multiple talks with studios. Richard revealed that in the early 2000s, there was serious consideration for a follow-up that explored their lives years after the fairy tale ended. It was tempting, he said. But every time we read it, it felt like we were stealing something sacred from the audience. So we left it untouched, as it should be. Despite not working together again in a Pretty Woman sequel, Julia and Richard remained in touch over the decades. Julia shared that Richard was one of the first people to call her when she won her Oscar. He left me this long voicemail. She laughed, and he cried through most of it. I still have it saved. Richard then shared a personal story during a rough patch in his life. Julia sent him a handwritten letter reminding him of the strength he once gave her. She didn't have to do that, he said. But that's who she is, and that's why Vivian was unforgettable. Their relationship, they both admitted, is rare in the industry. Not romantic, not simply friendship, but something deeper. A kind of soulmate connection rooted in shared history and mutual growth. Julia called it a bond forged in a moment that changed both our lives forever. Richard described it as finding a mirror, someone who shows you who you really are. As the evening went on, Julia and Richard were asked to read their final lines from the film. Julia smiled and whispered, "She rescues him right back," while Richard responded, "So what happens after he climbs up the fire escape?" The room fell silent. It was more than a reenactment. It was a goodbye, or maybe a thank you. To the story that gave them so much. In that moment, it became clear. What made Pretty Woman magical wasn't just a great script or a catchy soundtrack. It was the raw, unfiltered chemistry between two people who brought something deeply human to their roles. 35 years later, that connection is still alive, not just in their memories, but in every fan who believed in love because of them. Asterisk as the spotlight shone brightest on Julia Roberts and Richard Gere during the 2025 reunion. It was the emotional return of the rest of the cast that completed the full circle moment. These familiar faces, who each brought warmth, humor, and depth to the original film, stepped forward after decades, not just as actors, But as people who had lived entire lifetimes since Pretty Woman first hit the screens, one of the most touching arrivals was that of Hector Elizondo, the elegant and soft-spoken actor who played the kind-hearted hotel manager, Barney Thompson. In the film, Barney was the quiet guide who helped Vivian feel seen, a subtle but powerful role that gave the story its heart. Now 88 years old, Hector walked onto the reunion stage to a standing ovation. His hair was gray, his step a bit slower, but his charm hadn't faded. When he spoke, the room fell still. "I never knew one small role could follow me for the rest of my life," he said with a smile. "But I'm proud it was this one." Hector shared that people still recognize him as the nice hotel manager, a role that reminded audiences that dignity can be given to anyone. No matter their past, Lavra San Giacomo, who played Kit DeLuca, Vivian's bold, funny best friend, brought a jolt of energy to the stage. Wearing a glittering jumpsuit and flashing that same mischievous grin, she reminded everyone that Kit was more than just comic relief. She was scrappy. She was loyal, and she didn't pretend to be anyone else, Lavra said. She opened up about how playing Kit gave her the freedom to embrace characters that weren't perfect, but real. Over the years, Lavra took on powerful TV roles, became an advocate for disability rights after her son's diagnosis, and kept her acting career steady, always flying just under the radar. But this night, she stepped back into the spotlight. With ease and gratitude, the audience erupted when Jason Alexander took the stage. Known for his later role as George Costanza in Seinfeld, fans were reminded that he once played one of Pretty Woman's most hated characters, Philip Stuckey, Edward's arrogant and aggressive lawyer. Jason addressed the elephant in the room. With a wink, "I know. I was the guy everyone wanted to punch in the face." He revealed that after the film's release, strangers would come up to him and say, "You're that jerk." But he embraced the hate. "If people believed it that much, I must have done something right." Over the years, Jason found massive success in television, theater, and voice work, always proving he was far more than just a villain in a suit. There was also a surprise video message from Amy Yazbek, wife of the late Pretty Woman director Garry Marshall. Though she wasn't part of the original cast, she's considered part of the film's extended family. In the heartfelt message, she spoke about Gary's vision and how he saw potential in every actor. Gary didn't cast roles. He cast souls, she said. That's why the film still works. It's full of heart. The reunion also gave space for lesser-remembered but beloved supporting characters. The bellhop, the elevator operator, the snooty saleswomen, all present via video or special mentions. Each one played a role in shaping Vivian's journey from outsider to someone who finally believed in her own worth. Fans posted clips on social media from their favorite side moments, proving how deeply even the smallest roles had imprinted. On Hot's Worldwide. In a rare moment of reflection, the cast gathered for a roundtable conversation about life after Pretty Woman. They spoke honestly about the highs of fame and the struggles that followed. Some found success, others faded from the spotlight by choice. But all agreed that being part of something so lasting gave them a shared legacy. As Lavra put it, most actors do 100 things people forget. This is the one they remember, and I'm okay with that. Interestingly, many of the cast members had never been in the same room together since filming ended in 1989. Seeing each other again was emotional. Tears were shed, old jokes resurfaced. Stories that had never been told publicly were shared for the first time. They talked about the grueling night shoots, the laughing fits in between takes, and how Julia would always break character with her contagious laugh. It wasn't just a film they made. It was a chapter of life, frozen in time, one that they got to revisit together. The reunion also became a healing moment. Jason Alexander spoke openly about how uncomfortable he had felt about the physical aggression in one of the film's final scenes. "It's something I wrestled with for years," he admitted. But seeing how the film ended, with Vivian finding her voice and strength, that's what mattered. That's what people held on to. As the night came to a close, the entire cast stood together on stage, holding hands, soaking in the love from the audience. This wasn't just a cast. This was a family reunited not just by Hollywood magic, but by the very real bond that comes from telling a story that changed so many lives. And as they waved to the crowd, smiling through tears, the message was clear. Pretty Woman wasn't just a movie they were part of. It was a movement, one that continues to bring people together, even 35 years later.